This episode of Gators Breakdown is brought to you by UFM Underwear. Head to ufmunderwear.com and use promo code BREAKDOWN for $5 off your purchase. UFM Underwear, support your manhood. The Gators Breakdown podcast is ready to go. I'm your host, David Waters, and you can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. Joining me on this episode is Will Miles from readandreaction.com and on Twitter at WillMilesSEC. Will, plain and simple, this is a big one. Top 10 matchup versus the Auburn Tigers, that a team we don't get to see enough of in the swamp.
Yeah, man, season's finally starting. We've sort of been champing at the bit for this all year long. Hoped you'd get here 5-0 for both teams, and it's happened. So it's exciting. You got College Game Day coming to the swamp. You got you got the throwback jerseys, so we don't have to do any analysis because we never win games when we're wearing white helmets. At least that's what Twitter tells me. So, so it's going to be a good one. I mean, this is we won't have to hear any of the complaining about the student section not showing up on time and all the stuff that's sort of ancillary to the football all year long. At this point, no longer is ancillary to the football. It's a big game. I'm excited about it, man.
Absolutely there. And I think everybody's ready for this one. As you said, and we'll get into a little bit a little more on the episode, but you did say, the season starts now. In a way, it's kind of this is kind of a reset in a way, because this is the stretch of the schedule, starting with Auburn, that we've went and looked at before the season started, that we know would define Florida's season, how successful it could be. It kicks off with Auburn. Well, I kind of alluded to it just a second ago when we were discussing this, but and Mullins even brought it up. I didn't have this in the episode, but it just brought up a good point that was in my head here. Kind of what we were discussing when Florida and Miami were playing against each other is, and the conference gets in the way here. But man, I mean, Florida Auburn used to be something else, man. In the mid '90s, and Auburn's on probation, and Florida can't beat them. Terry Bowden's leading the way there. All the great games in the early 2000s. 2001, Auburn gave Florida their first loss, but turn around and Zook comes and beats Auburn in overtime with a great Rex Grossman pass, and then it's just. And then, of course, I think you have to go to 2006, and Auburn's the only loss on Florida's schedule. There's been a lot of Florida success versus Auburn since 90s, when most of us got into Florida football with our age and all that. It's the 90s on forward. There's been a lot of success versus Auburn, but the ones where Auburn gets Florida, man, those sting.
They really do. I mean, I was there for a game-ending field goal at one point where Auburn, walked off with a field goal, and then, obviously you alluded to the game in 2006 where, Leak, I still swear that was not a fumble.
Yeah.
I don't know how that was called a fumble, and even with replay, they didn't get it right. So, yeah, there's been. It feels like those are the games where, we talk about it every year. Actually, for the last 3 years, we've talked about LSU being a fulcrum game, and Auburn, based on where it is in the season, sort of has that same effect, right? I mean, if Florida wins this game, then that game in Baton Rouge the next week is just next level in terms of how big that is. And, that's the kind of gravitas Auburn has. Auburn's always a very good program. And, it's just different than playing Mississippi State or playing Ole Miss or playing Arkansas, right? I mean, you win that game, you're supposed to win that game if you're Florida. When you're playing Auburn, that's one of those where it's like really a 50-50 proposition most of the time. It's the elite of the elite, and those are the games you want to be in.
Absolutely. So one quick shout out before we get into the meat of the episode here. The group I tailgate with, the Harmonic Woods Tailgaters, are celebrating their 10-year anniversary this year, and it culminates with this Saturday's tailgate. The moniker here, "We tailgate harder than your team plays," is an awesome motto for the group, and Will, you can attest to that there. So, I can't wait to be amongst that group this Saturday. Shout out to Mayor and the crew for putting on more than a tailgate. It's an event that's been around for 10 years. Will, as I said, you've been there to tailgate. There's nothing like it. Been featured. We were featured on CNN 2 weeks ago for the Tennessee game. In the past, they've been on ESPN. The Wall Street Journal has featured them. It is different when you're amongst that group, and different in such a good way.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and they travel some too, which is kind of unique for tailgates. And
yeah, it was a Kentucky game this year. So
Yeah, well, I mean, and I had a good time. I was there for the Missouri game last year, and the tailgating scene was a little bit subdued after the loss to Georgia, but not at the Harmonic Woods tailgate, man. That place is hopping. I'm sure it's going to be crazy for this game against Auburn. I'm sorry I can't be there because this could be a blast.
Absolutely, that was. I wish everybody, could make that one. One of my best friends is flying in from New York. He's an Auburn fan. He's coming down for the game, so he'll get introduced the right way.
I was gonna say you gonna get him drunk for roaming the bushes and then take his ticket. Is that?
I'll be nice. All right, before we get here to the episode, remember you can find Gators Breakdown on news4jax.com/Gators Breakdown. There you'll find all the Gators Breakdown episodes. Also catch the episodes at Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, or YouTube. When using those services, please share, rate, and review the show. And on social media, follow Gators Breakdown on Twitter and Facebook at Gators Breakdown. Also, every week, you'll be able to catch it later on in the week, a News4Jax exclusive Talking with Troop, where former Gators tight end Ben Troop joins me once a week this season to give a look at the Gators, give his thoughts on there. So a lot, of course, looking forward to a Troop with this big matchup versus Auburn, and that's exclusively every week on news4jax.com/Gators Breakdown. Will, okay, here we go. A lot riding on this game for the Gators against Auburn. We know it's only one game, not going to define Florida's season, but it can go a long way in the short term. Kind of hit on that a little bit already, as you said, looking at the LSU game the next week too. But this game will affect the perception and maybe even expectations for Florida. ESPN's College Game Day will be in town. It's the CBS 3:30 game in a week that doesn't really have a great slate of games nationally. It's homecoming, all the hoopla that comes with that. Florida's breaking out the throwback jerseys. A lot's being packed into this game. All eyes would be on Gainesville this Saturday. And Florida's already been in a similar situation already this year. We're taking on Miami in the season opener, and all eyes on Florida for that one. But boy, did the narrative change about Florida as soon as that game ended. Florida doesn't deserve to be in the top 10. Florida isn't that great of a team, and the narrative hasn't changed with close wins versus Kentucky and beating a bad Tennessee team. Still struggling in certain areas, even though you shut out Towson and UT Martin. And to be honest, there's a lot of fair critiques out there. But heck, that's even calls Florida to Paul Fonbaum put out this today. It's caused Florida to drop twice in the AP poll after wins versus Miami, and then this past poll after beating Towson. So I think we can agree as a fan base this season so far hasn't been a smooth ride for the Gators, but they are 5-0. Found a way to win games. Does all that mean they're not worthy of a top 10 team? The answers are split on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could kind of make the same argument for Auburn. I mean, they beat an Oregon team who hasn't looked quite as impressive since that initial game. I mean, they blew out an FCS opponent, but then struggled with, sort of what I would deem a cupcake, and then struggled with Stanford a couple of weeks ago as well on the road. You look at Texas A&M. They're not necessarily all that great a team when you look at how they've played. Kellen Mond's really struggled and
took everything they could to beat Arkansas.
Right. So when you look at A&M and you look at Kentucky, are they really that different? I mean, I think A&M beats Kentucky, but I don't necessarily think that's. I guess basically what I'm saying is when we're talking about one game changing in perception, the one game that changed the perception of Auburn was really Mississippi State, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And that everyone thinks Oregon is a fantastic team, and they thought Texas A&M going into that game was a really good team, and so Auburn beat them close. But because the perception of those teams was that they were very, very good, then the perception of Auburn is that they're good too. I think it's also a question of building, right? I mean, one of the things that we've sort of seen over the first 5 games with Florida is we keep saying, well, we want to see growth on the offensive line. Mm-hmm. And then you haven't necessarily seen growth, at least in the results on the running game. And then you say, hey, we want to see Felipe Franks develop throughout the year. He gets hurt against Kentucky. And now you're sort of saying, okay, well, what do we have with Kyle Trask? So, that's not to say that Trask is worse than Franks. It's just to say that, I don't think people at a national scale believe the win against Tennessee and Towson in terms of how good he is, and he's going to have to show it against a good team. And I got to be honest, if he goes out and plays the same way he has the last 2 weeks against Auburn, Florida's got a great chance to win, and that really does change the perception of the team, because at that point, you've beaten a team that everybody thinks is really, really good. And you get those opportunities 3 or 4 times a year. Florida's going to get them 3 times in the next 4 weeks. But, you have the opportunity to change that perception. And I mean, again, I think the reality is that these teams are probably pretty even. And I think perception only matters when you get to the end. And
There you,
so the
yep, there you
perception is
go.
going to change 2 or 3 times throughout the year. It's not going to matter if you beat Auburn and LSU, if you get stomped by Georgia. So end of the day, this is the first step in a gauntlet. It's a home game, so you want to make sure that you play well and that you put your best foot forward in a home game. But end of the day, yeah, it can change perceptions, but I don't really care about perceptions. I care about being in the playoff. So a win here is important to get into the playoff. That's why it's important to me.
Yeah, it's a statement game in the way that it can either shut the doubters up for a little while or prove the doubters right. That's the way they're looking at it. Even Paul Feinbaum is all day or pretty much all season not been high on Florida, kind of continuing that narrative today. And there really isn't much in the middle of that. I guess a close loss and some type of great game played can do that. But for the most part, we're going to get answers for this Gators team, answers people are looking for. Are they elite? Do they belong in the top 10? Are they good? How good? This is a chance for Florida to gain some respect. I don't want to make the game bigger than it is, and it's certainly not an end-all, be-all or a final indictment on this team. But perception goes a long way, as you said, basically toward the end there. You want to kind of build that and let it build as the season goes on. But it doesn't really matter as long as you win games. And with Florida's schedule, that's exactly what needs to happen. But this is a chance for, there's a lot of talk out there lately about how game day and Kirk Herbstreit and Desmond Howard all love to pick against the Gators or pick a close game versus Tennessee, or lately, as I said, Feinbaum down in the Gators or national perception, just out there, just in general, that this Gators team doesn't deserve to be top 10. They're dropping when they get wins. There, I've seen, I think Joel Klatt from Fox Sports also pretty, emphatically out there saying Florida's not a top 10 team. So, if everybody, when you turn on game day, when you turn on Sports Center, when you turn on SEC Network, you like to hear your team talked about. You like to see your team talked about in a positive manner. That hasn't happened a lot for Florida. You win this game against Auburn, at least for a few days, because the media's love fest for LSU, but at least for a few days, Florida will probably get some positive talk and positive momentum after this game if they come out with a win.
Sure. I mean, it's fun to watch those, the game day final and those sorts of things when your team's won, particularly when you got to see somebody eat crow who picked the other team to start with. Believe me, last year I picked LSU and everybody let me know it right afterwards. So, it's not fun being on that side of it, but it's certainly fun when you're on the other side of it. And that's why college football is great, right? Is that you get to have these debates. And I think people try to use the transitive property and say, well, since Auburn beat Oregon, if Florida can beat, Florida can beat Auburn, then they're better than Oregon. I don't know that it necessarily translates that way, but
well, I mean, the perfect example there, Will, go look. North Carolina loses to App State last week, and you know what? They had a chance to beat Clemson this past weekend.
Yeah,
But
well,
it just doesn't work.
Well, it is interesting though that I do think that you need to start taking into account. One of the things I do try to look at is who does a team play before they come into the game, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and if you look at Auburn, they got at Texas A&M and then Mississippi State. Yeah, they rolled over Mississippi State, but you do wonder what kind of energy they're going to have left, because they clearly were up for that Mississippi State game, and now you got to get up again. And
on the road,
if there's anything that we've learned is in college football, it's that it's really difficult to get 18, 19, and 20-year-olds up every week. And we saw it with Clemson this past week, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can't tell me that Clemson didn't think, oh, this team lost to App State, we're just going to come out and roll over them. But it's a road game. At North Carolina. North Carolina came out, hit Trevor Lawrence in the mouth a few times. They didn't have ninth-year senior Hunter Renfrow to bail him out. And, at the end of the day, like, Clemson struggled. And I think, now everybody is going to look at Clemson and go, oh, we need to drop them to third or fourth or something like that. It's like, no, it's a bunch of 18-year-olds who are really good, who decided to take a week off because they thought they could, and they almost got caught. And, I think the same thing could apply to Auburn here, where you've got some guys who absolutely dominated last week, and they're going to come into the swamp thinking that they're going to do the same thing. They get hit in the mouth real quick, fall behind, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, it's a whole lot easier to throw that ball up for jump balls and the sorts of things that they were able to do last week against Mississippi State when you're up by 30 points. It's a whole lot more difficult when you're down 14 on the road. So um, I'm excited. I think this is going to be a close game. I think the teams are pretty close. Um, Again, I think the perception is really just a matter of, do you want to hear your team spoken well about? I'm not sure we're going to get what we want anyway. I
Yeah.
think I think at the end of the day, a lot of people made up their minds at that Miami game the same way a lot of the fans made up their minds about Felipe Franks 2 years ago. And until you've proven them wrong, and proving them wrong really means more than one game. It's going to have to be Auburn, LSU, and Georgia, and then you come out of that stretch, and if they go in this next stretch, if they go 4-0 in October, then they'll get the respect. If they go 2-2, then the people who were doubters are correct. And I don't think the doubters are saying they're not a top 25 team. I think they're saying that
Yeah.
they don't think they're cream of the crop in the SEC. And the nice part is when you're in the conference, you get to prove it. So we'll get to see that this weekend and in the coming weeks as well.
Yeah, and this might be the most winnable game when you look at the top ranked opponents that Florida has, that are that they're going to play in the next month or so. Have to travel to Baton Rouge versus LSU next week. That we found out today is going to be a night game on ESPN. So you follow that up with a trip to South Carolina after having, much like we're talking about Auburn here, after having to get up for two top 10 opponents. So that'll get the trap game label or the must-win game label for whatever happens in these two games coming up. And then you have to play a top 3 Georgia after a bye week. So this Auburn game could go a long way in giving this team some confidence to get things rolling, like the Mississippi State game did last year for this Gators team. Everyone out there is patting Auburn on the back after a strong start and pounding Mississippi State last week. So this will be a big win, I think, in people's minds, and can calm down the detractors just a little bit of this Gators team. So it's in the end, yeah, it really doesn't matter. But in looking on Twitter too much and looking on message boards, it does matter. People out there are discussing just the national narrative that is around Florida.
Well, and the place that it matters is all of those recruits who are going to be sitting there.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, at the end of the day, Mullen has,
and this is a big weekend. Big weekend.
Well, I mean, let's be honest, right? He's struggled to bring in those elite caliber guys consistently, and that he's bringing in a top 10 class, but he's not bringing in top 5, and certainly not bringing in classes that are competitive with Alabama and Georgia. And the way to change that clearly is going to be to win. And so if you win big against Auburn, that makes a huge difference. Auburn's one of those schools that you have to compete with, not only on the field, but on the recruiting trail as well. And, having that positive press for the week heading into the LSU game, I think makes a difference twofold for recruiting, right? I mean, you get the week, you get the win with the guys who are in the swamp, but then you get people talking about the program for a week going into that LSU game. And again, if you pull that off, then you got 3 straight weeks where people are talking about Florida as an elite national power. People want to go to schools like that. So I think from that standpoint, that's maybe where I think the narrative really makes a difference, is that, people are doubting whether Florida is a paper tiger at this point. And the only way to go out and prove it is to go out and beat all the Tigers that are sitting in your way. So they got 2 more, and we'll see what they can do.
Well, we're making too much of game day coming to town and all the hoopla surrounding this game. I thought go back, and a lot of people were trying to go and compare it to past big games in Gators recent history, at least. Go back to last year's LSU game in 2015, McElwain and his Gators in that Ole Miss game when Ole Miss is coming to town. There, a lot of people were pointing to those 2 games there in recent memory of kind of some situations where Florida's not looked at as a team that can beat the team coming in home to the swamp. And I believe I looked it up yesterday, and so I think this is the first time Florida in a top 10 matchup are home underdogs since 2012 versus LSU. Interesting dynamic there. But with game day, with homecoming, with everything surrounding this game, and like I kind of mentioned it, earlier, the Miami game, of course, to kick off the season where Florida had the spotlight on them. I mean, this is a big game, and not even for the narrative that out there. Just if we're focusing just on Florida and what Florida can do, and it's Florida fans. I mean, this game is big, and it's good to have a big top 10 game in the Swamp. Mullen talks about it all the time. It's the Gator standard. This is why you come to Florida to play in games like these. Haven't been many of them recently. Go back to LSU last year. You got another one this year with Auburn coming to town. Hopefully, this is becoming a yearly occurrence to where we have more games like this in the Swamp. And I mean, look, last year you had the big win versus LSU in the Swamp, but later on in the year you had the dud against Missouri. So Mullins had some mixed results of what he does at home, and I think one big takeaway this year in his second year was to kind of turn it around and make the Swamp intimidated again. Pretty good crowd and what it was a couple weeks ago against Tennessee, but no, this is with a microscope, the big game of the season here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, people pointed to this before the season even started and said, we hope both teams can get to this at 5-0, right? I mean, you don't want Auburn coming in limping in at 2-3. You want them to be a big boy when they come in here to play, and you get that opportunity to do that. So I think it makes a huge difference for them. I think it makes a huge difference for the players. I think it makes a huge difference for the fans. You know how it is on that campus. It is electric when you've got just the whole day. I mean, you wake up in the morning and you go out on campus, especially if you're living on campus, and there's just a buzz. And to have that buzz going all the way through that campus the entire day is a really special thing. It's why those of us who went there fell in love with college football in the first place. I mean, we liked it coming in, but man, once you spend time on that campus, it just makes a difference in terms of how you perceive it. So I think the 2012 LSU game is the one that really is sort of popping up into my head. That's one of the ones where I thought Muschamp finally, I thought at that point we were like, hey, we're in good hands with this guy, which obviously proved not to be the truth after a while. But that was a game where you just looked at it. I felt proud of the team after that game because they had really sort of been, they had the narrow win against A&M where Driscoll made the pass on the road. They beat Johnny Football, and nobody knew that he was good when Florida played him. And in that LSU game, they basically just popped him in the mouth, right? And it was something where they just out-physicaled LSU in that game, beat them down, and eventually were able to pull away in the fourth quarter because of it. And it was one of those things where you say, okay, yeah, that's the identity of my team. Now, I don't think Florida necessarily has that identity for this year's team. But I think it's the same type of thing where if they can utilize the things they do well, and really what they do well is they throw the ball. And if they can utilize that and they can chuck it all over the yard, then you're going to walk out of this game feeling really good about Kyle Trask at quarterback and sort of have that same feeling, right? That, we were underestimated. We had our backup quarterback and still took a top 10 team and beat him at home. And I think more than anything, that really says something about the program that if a backup quarterback can come in and can dominate a top 10 SEC opponent in a big game like this, then you say, okay, now the program is healthy because of really what that says.
Yeah, just ready for that. Like you said, just ready for that big game feeling in Gainesville or everything surrounding it. And as you said, there's nothing else like that. That stadium with 90,000 fans are going crazy. We long for it, but we want it back what it was in the Spurrier and Urban days when it seemed like a big game every weekend, every home game weekend, and that's exactly what this one's feeling like. So we'll get into more of the Gators and kind of what they're bringing to the table here versus Auburn. But before we do, guys, you have got to go try UFM underwear. It's hot out there, so whether you're tailgating or working, you need a pair of UFM underwear. Underwear for Men is the only brand of men's underwear that offers both isolation and support, all while keeping you cool. Unlike other pouch underwear brands that have thin mesh panels or pre-sized pouches, Underwear for Men's patent pending design prevents skin-on-skin contact and eliminates chafing. Underwear for Men is a state of Florida company and has you covered no matter the activity. Everyday underwear, athletic underwear, work underwear, medical underwear, Underwear for Men is made for it all. Try your pair now. Head over to ufmunderwear.com and use promo code BREAKDOWN to get $5 off your purchase. UFM Underwear. Support your manhood. So, Will, of course, the big topic for this Gators team and going against Auburn is the offensive line versus the defensive line, and probably the biggest mismatch going into the game that we see. So we'll see. We'll see what happens there. But Mullen kind of called him out, or no, not kind of. Mullen called him out after the game this past weekend against Towson. Once again, opened up about the offensive line in his Monday press conference when asked in saying. It was saying, what the offensive line currently is doing is not enough. And that's the gist of what he said Saturday night. And it was the gist of what he was saying Monday as well. Florida's limited, Will, to put it nicely, and what they can do here. So far this season, it looks like they have 6 guys they trust to go out there in Forsyth, Heggie, Buchanan, Bleish, DeLance, and Garage. Of course, we're starting to see the tinkering more with Garage and inserting him at left guard while moving Heggie to right guard. Moving forward, I'd start with that set and see if it improves the inside run game. I think that's the biggest detractor so far of what the offensive line is bringing to the table, not being able to get that run game going specifically inside. So I'm not expecting some big jump in production with that move being made, but something has to happen on the right side of that offensive line, and that's a starting point. Bleish and DeLance just, haven't had the best of years so far and also struggle much more than they should have versus the likes of Towson.
Yeah, I mean, the issue that you run into really when you look at the offensive line is twofold. One is that I think there are missed assignments, and that was really what Mullen called him out for after the game on Saturday. But the other thing is that they're not necessarily being physical even when they do carry out their assignments.
There
So
you go.
I
Yep.
got an article that's going to be coming out tonight probably, or at least tomorrow morning, and it's going to be looking at this. And really what you see is that a lot of times there's a blown assignment and the play gets blown up, but a lot of times the offensive lineman gets to the linebacker he's supposed to get to and then just kind of put two-hand touches him, and you know the running back gets ready to cut, and all of a sudden the linebacker's there, and he comes out from behind the offensive lineman. I don't see any pancakes. And when
Yeah.
you're 325 pounds and you're taking on a 250-pound linebacker or 225-pound linebacker, when you're talking about Towson, like there need to be some pancakes. Like those guys need to be laying on their butt because you just came in and ran them over. And if you miss them because you're coming in with full effort, that's fine. But it looks like they're being kind of tentative even when they do things right. So I think that, when they're in the right spot. So I
Yeah.
think maybe that's the thing you can correct. Like, you're not going to be able to correct the missed assignments. when P. Ryan got drilled down on the goal line, you can't do anything about that, right? Like somebody screwed up. I'm not entirely sure who it was, but somebody screwed up. And, you can't do anything about that. You screw up that assignment, somebody's going to get drilled. But what you can do is you can control when you're in the right place. Are you playing with a physicality, and are you playing with an anger? And I haven't necessarily seen that. Now maybe on the Towson tape it shows up that way because the guys were sort of sleepwalking through a game against a cupcake, but you haven't seen that really all year either.
Yeah.
So I think that's maybe the thing I would look for is there. And I think I said this at some point. I think I said this during the spring game. Maybe I wanted somebody to get an unsportsmanlike penalty. Just
Mm.
go out there and hit somebody hard and sort of draw a flag. I mean, that wouldn't be a bad thing early if one of the offensive linemen, over was overzealous in driving someone to the ground or driving them into the sideline. I would welcome that because of what it means in terms of that they're ready and that they may be beaten because of their technique or because they don't know exactly where they're supposed to be, but they're not going to get beaten because they're being tentative. I think maybe that's the change you'd like to see, more than anything specifically with the scheme. There are probably some scheme things they can do too. One of the things they did do was they put the quarterback under center a lot more
Yeah.
in the game against Towson, ran some inside zone plays, more stretch plays like you see in old Denver Broncos offenses, were the kinds of things that you saw. And that's where they started to get a little bit of success, particularly with Pierce. But I think P. Ryan would have had similar successes had they blocked the plays for P. Ryan in the same way. I mean, he's looked a little bit tentative, but let's be honest, when you're getting hit 5 yards behind the line of scrimmage, you're going to look tentative anyway. Pierce has a little bit better ability to shake those tackles. So I do think that maybe, your tackles for loss aren't quite as bad. Maybe you get a 5-yard gain instead of a 3-yard gain. But end of the day, I don't necessarily think it's a running back. I think it's a matter of the offensive line when it does what it when the guys do what they're supposed to do, making sure that they finish the play.
Well, you kind of alluded to it with scheme and everything that's going on there. I'm still in the mind that we still haven't seen Dan Mullen get creative as he wants to be, or maybe the offense even opened up to a point. But the question is, can it be opened up? Can it get creative, or is the offensive line too deficient to where that's to where it's limited? It's hard to mask offensive line issues in the SEC, but I believe there is something there Mullen can bring to the table to help keep defenses off balance. We probably start seeing more misdirection type plays. Pirine out of the backfield, catching the ball more, of course, wide receiver screen passes to help extend the run game. But defenses will catch on to most of that at some point. As good as these defenses are that Florida's coming up on the schedule, eventually this offensive line is going to have to improve if Florida is to play up to their potential in offense. But I remember in the second half, and it's 3rd and 2 versus Towson. And, that should be a point where you can rely on an offensive line versus an overmatched defensive line. Go get, push them back 2 yards, get a first down, and keep the drive moving. But it was the play where I believe Trask was under center. Trevon Grimes is moving in motion, and he catches the screen off of the motion. First time I've kind of seen Florida run that play. But, it's 3rd and 2. And here they are running a wide receiver screen to go get the 3-4 yards that they need. And I think they're working on that because they know they're going to need it in that same situation coming up, because there's not a lot of confidence they can run the ball in that same situation.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of it. I think part of it as well is you want to show that, so that Auburn has to look at it and take a guy out of the box to make sure that they take that away, right? Like, the whole point of the run game is that you want to try to get a numbers advantage. And if you can't get a numbers, I mean, if when you're even, you don't have an advantage, then you got to find a way to get one up. And if teams are going to dedicate more resources to stopping the passing game, then great. Then you should be able to run the ball if you've got an advantage by one player up there up front. I think, yeah, they're going to do a few things to try to get things going. I think for the most part, there's not a whole lot you can do. Though what I would say is that so the reason they announced the starting offensive line today, and they basically kept the starters the same as they had, all year. And there are reasons for that. And a lot of that has to do with the pass protection, which has been pretty good. And if you look at the strength of Florida's offense, it's throwing the ball. And it's identifying the one-on-one matchups and finding those. And even when the opposing team is playing defenses that are more geared towards pass plays, Mullen's offense really has an answer for those sorts of things, based as long as the quarterback goes to the right receiver. So I think that's really what you're going to have to see. Is you're going to have to see a bit of an aerial show, which is interesting to say. If you'd have told me that I was going to say that we were going to need an aerial show with Kyle Trask at quarterback to beat Auburn, or before the season started, I would have said, okay, that probably doesn't bode well. But
Well, that kind of goes to our episode last week where it was a different looking 4-0 start, and now a different looking 5-0 start heading into this Auburn game.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, the offense is going to be able. So the offense will be able to move the ball because they do it through the air, because Mullen's a creative play caller. Remember last year he pulled out that reverse throwback pass with Lucas Kroll that nobody had seen before against LSU. So he had a wrinkle up his sleeve for that particular game. Same as when they went to Mississippi State and they thought they were overmatched up front. They pulled out the trick play to Kadarius Toney. So I don't doubt he's going to have a play like that they're going to rep and that they're going to try to take advantage of. One thing I did think of last week when they were doing all of the screen passes is I was wondering whether they were trying to set up Auburn for the types of things they want to do. Mm-hmm. So, if you can't run the ball and you think you might struggle if you get one-dimensional, one thing you might try to do is get Auburn to bring their corners up a little bit, and then maybe you can hit a couple of deep shots in the game and get some, I don't want to call them cheap points because you still got to hit the play, but Trask has shown that he's pretty adept at hitting that, especially down the middle. If you can get them to come up to try to stop the third down conversion on a little screen pass, you might be able to hit something deep. When you're sort of faking that little screen pass, because I don't think you show that screen pass against Towson unless you're using it to set up something deceptive against either Auburn or LSU coming up. Because why would you give that away, right? Like that's an effective alternative to the run game. I suspect that that's setting something up for this game. And if it's a close game, maybe midway in the third quarter, watch for something where they use that as a decoy, slip the receiver next to him out deep, and see if they can hit him on a busted coverage.
Yeah, real. You read my mind. I was, taking notes and getting ready for the preview episode I'll have later in the week too. And I really do believe wide receivers beating press coverage this week will be big because I do think Auburn will be bringing Kevin Steele. Has defended Dan Mullen's offense pretty good the last two times they played each other from Auburn and Mississippi State days. So yeah, and if he creeps those defensive backs up, I do think it's imperative those wide receivers break the man coverage there and try and hit some big plays down the field. And well, before we move on to the defense here, of course, I think that besides the offensive line, and because of the offensive line, one of the bigger questions on offense is the use of Lamichael Pirine and Damian Pierce. Who should get more carries? Who should start? I still think Lamichael Pirine should start because of what else he brings there to the table as far as he's the better pass blocker out of the two. And I think Florida's going to need some protection to help that offensive line versus this Auburn defensive line. And for what this Auburn defensive line is, they're still better. They're better at stuffing the run more so than they are going back there and creating habits for sacks. It's more about stuffing the run. So, maybe that's another thing for Florida to look at in this game. You can't run the ball anyway, and nobody can run the ball in Auburn. So it may be where you don't have much of a choice but to pass the ball anyway. But and so I think given those options of Lamichael Pirine still being maybe a step ahead of Pierce in pass blocking and also him being a receiver out of the backfield, you still see a good bit of Lamichael Pirine early on. But I do think Damian Pierce has done enough to warrant some carries early in the game. If the run game's struggling, or if you want to try and get the run game going, maybe you get the run game more going with him. But if you're going to be out there passing the ball as much as we think it's going to take for Florida to win this game, I still think you're going to see a whole lot of Lamichael Pirine.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to have the deception out there of Pirine in some capacity so that you're not giving away what you're doing, especially if you're not comfortable with Pierce and pass protection. Because we talked about narratives earlier, and I think the narrative is that the Florida offense has struggled, and I think the narrative as well is that those close games were close because the offense was struggling until Trask took over in the Kentucky game. That narrative isn't true though when you look at the facts. So Florida is 87th in yards per rush this year, but they're 21st in yards per play. So they're 13th in yards per pass. They've been chucking the ball all over the place, and that's against FBS opponents. So, Florida's a top 20 offense in terms of yards per play. They haven't been able to finish the drives, but it's not like they've stalled in the red zone. It's that they haven't been able to finish the drives because they turned the ball over so much. So against Tennessee, they didn't turn the ball over near as much. They still did in the second half, but they didn't turn the ball over in the first half at all. Well, they had the one fumble, I guess, for Trask, but beyond that, they had the one turnover. And then last week against Towson, they didn't have any. So when they haven't turned the ball over, they've been very effective at scoring, and they've really moved the ball very well. Now obviously turnovers count. You can't have those sorts of things. That I think is maybe the key to the game more so than the running efficacy is, are you able to avoid turnovers if you're gonna end up being one dimensional regardless who you have in there, which means you need the running back in there who's going to be the best in pass protection because Trask will hold on to the ball. And the last 2 weeks we've seen fumbles where he's been stripped when he's been getting ready to throw, and the line hasn't been able to hold up for as long as he's wanted to hold on to the ball. So to me, that's the thing you look at. I don't know that the running game is like, I'm not concerned what their yards per rush is in this case. I think what I'm concerned about is, does Trask have enough time to continue being able to throw the ball down the field? And that's sort of where the game's going to be decided.
Yeah, and I'll get to it later in the preview episode too. But I do wonder, just how creative Florida gets in the run game too. We haven't seen a lot of the outside speed option plays. I don't know how comfortable Kyle Trask is running that in comparison to how Felipe Franks ran it with Lamichael Pirine starting in the mid stretch of the season like last year. We're about a year removed from that, where we started seeing that mid stretch. Last year, do we see it mid stretch this year? I don't know how comfortable Kyle Trask is running that play. We didn't. I don't think we haven't seen it much since the Malik Davis fumble against Miami. That's the last notable time I remember seeing that play there. So we know that's in the arsenal. We know that's in the playbook. And also, moving towards the goal line there, and Josh Hammond getting sweeps so that we would normally see Kadarius Toney or maybe even Jacob Copeland take. Surprisingly, it's Josh Hammond taking those, and that's after he busted one versus Kentucky though. So a nice little wrinkle there that we've seen that Auburn will have to prepare for when they see Josh Hammond out there lined up wide as well. Will,
Yeah, I'll
before
tell you.
yeah,
I'll tell you the one thing that I think Pierce did do really well in that Towson game, and if you go back and look at the film, he seems to do really well. Is he will cut back after the defenders overrun the play. And you saw that in a couple of the plays against Towson where the offensive line didn't necessarily do a fantastic job of blocking the play, but he was able to cut back against the zone. And that's something you always saw with, again, those Denver Broncos teams that were running those inside zone
Terrell
plays.
Davis was golden with that.
Very much so. And when they were under center and they were running that basically stretch play, those cutback lanes were there, and Pierce was hitting those and hitting those hard. So that's maybe something to look for. But Florida's only going to get under center every once in a while. They're not going to run. They're not going to run that play a ton. I agree with you. Last year against LSU was when we sort of saw the odd option that they would run to the weak side of the defense. They'd tried running it against Kentucky earlier in the year to the strong side and had gotten completely stuffed. So they moved it to the weak side of the defense and were able to make some hay that way. The other thing is I think we looked at, if you look at where the offensive line was last year against Kentucky and even Mississippi State, it was a work in progress. And then it wasn't until really the South Carolina game that it started to all gel together. Now, obviously, Mullen wants it to gel together a whole lot quicker here, but I think what you're going to see is he's going to have a few subtle schematic changes to help open up a few things. You don't need to hit. You don't need to hit 4 yards every run. What you need to hit is 3 or 4 20-yard runs to loosen things up, get those safeties up. And if you get the safeties up, then it opens up what you want to do, which is throw the ball, because they've been very good at that this year.
Will, other side of the ball here, Gators got killed on third down again early on versus Towson, but all in all, still come up with a shutout. The Gators, of course, were missing some key players versus Auburn and versus Towson, but versus Auburn, they should get plenty of ammo with players coming back from injury. Finally, get to see some great tandems back together again. C.J. Henderson comes back paired with Marco Wilson. Jabari Zuniga comes back paired with Jonathan Grenard. Also, Ventrell Miller comes back after being dinged up the last couple games. Sean Davis is back as well. So, Zuniga and Grenard can pressure and set the edge to help slow down Auburn's outside run game. Henderson back is big because it gives you a speedster to kind of keep up with Anthony Schwartz and limit big plays in the passing game and run game from him. Miller, Davis are pretty sound tacklers in their right, something Florida needs right now on defense. So it's definitely been set up this way, Will, but the Gators getting healthy at the right time should help in controlling what Auburn can do to a point.
Absolutely. I mean, I remember when we had the credit card scandal a couple of years ago and all those players were missing, and it's like, we'll just have the next guys step up. And clearly that wasn't what happened in 2017. Like units get worse when you've got multiple starters out, and particularly then if you have any sort of injuries that then deplete things further. So the backups have been stretched coming in as starters. I think that probably served Florida well over the course of the entire year that those guys got those reps. But now you've got these guys coming in who not only are hopefully 100%, not only are more skilled, but also don't have the wear and tear of the last 2, 3, 4 games on their body. Whereas, we mentioned Auburn coming in off of a physical game against A&M, and then obviously the win last week, but still getting hyped up for that. Everybody by the time you get to 4, 5, 6 games into the year is starting to feel it a little bit. And these guys who are coming back, Zuniga hasn't rushed the passer in 3 games. And so he should feel fresh, should have lots of energy, assuming he's 100%. Same thing with C.J. Henderson, same thing with, in some capacity, Ventrell Miller and Sean Davis as well. So I think there's some advantages to getting those guys back. Obviously, you hope they don't have rust early on. But I think in the rest versus rust argument, I think rest makes a difference much more than rust, particularly when you're in the SEC and everybody's getting dinged up.
Yeah, and part of it too is when they do come back, are they not only rust, are they 100%? Are they playing at 80%? Are they playing at 90%? A 90% CJ Henderson, I'll take anyway. Zuniga, as much as you know, some out there, he may not be quite 100% either, but pair him with what Grenard's been able to do these last few games, and I think getting that tandem together really, I think, really just helps slow down this Auburn run game as far as being able to help contain it. And we saw Florida have a little bit of trouble this week containing the quarterback, which I thought was a pretty good preview of what Nix can do. I thought Flacco, brought some things to the table where at least it's a little preview of what Nix can do in his run style, break open some busted plays there. So, Jeremiah Moon necessarily wasn't the best in spying him. So maybe it's somebody different this week, because I think you maybe have learned the lesson this week that that's not necessarily the best part of his game there. But, Amari Burney, I feel pretty comfortable in maybe putting in that role that there as well. So, Ventrell Miller as well, what he's able to do. Maybe even safety and bringing Sean Davis up as well as the sound tackler that he can be and help spying what Nix is doing. So, of course, a lot of that's down and distance determined there with how you defend the quarterback. But good to have those guys back. I think as I said, it was planned. There was no need to really play them these last couple games. We saw that with the way the final scores indicated those games. Made the right move, not rushing those guys out there. But Will, man, just everything surrounding this one, having those guys back, of course, is big. So when the defense is on the field, and from what you've seen of Auburn so far this year, anything that just kind of catches your eye for of course, third down defense, of course, is going to be important. But I think having those guys back, and probably for me, the reason those third downs happen was because poor tackling. So I think tackling, of course, is probably the biggest issue here.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I went to go look at the actual stats, Florida's defense has been way better than I think the eye test has shown me. You watch the game and you're like, God, we can't get off the field. What's the problem? Why can't we get off the field? But you look at it, yards per play allowed, Florida, even with all those injuries, is 20th in the country against FBS opponents. Now, granted, that's only 3 games, but still 20th. They're 38th in third down conversion percentage allowed. So not nearly as bad as I would have thought they would have been based on what we've seen. And when you go back and look at it, it starts to make a little bit of sense because they're streaky, right? Yep. So that game against Miami, in the third quarter, Miami had -2 yards. And so you think, well, yeah, well, they gave up that opening drive and they weren't necessarily all that effective and they struggled on third down, but it was like 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out in the third quarter, and kept Florida in that game. Same thing when you think about the fourth quarter against Kentucky. It wasn't quite as extreme as that, but it was, getting the big turnover on Sawyer Smith. It was, it was stopping them right out of the chute, so that you had an opportunity right after the fourth down stop. Where Franks got injured. Well, then all of a sudden, Florida comes back, makes its own fourth down stop, and then Trask takes the ball right down the field, and Florida's back in the game. So the defense has stepped up at times when they've had to. They've been lights out in a quarter or two in these games, but then have struggled in a quarter or two in these games. There's no room to struggle against Auburn at this point. But again, when you look at the overall sort of body of work, particularly with all the guys who've been injured, I think the defense has been really, really good, which is curious to me. I mean, that wasn't something I expected. I expected to see them, they're like 40th, 45th, something like that. No, 20th. And, we talked about narratives earlier. Auburn has based on its play against FBS opponents, on a yards per play basis, Auburn has a defense that's worse than Florida's and an offense that's worse than Florida's. It's not a significant amount, so it's 21st is Florida's offense in yards per play, 30, and Auburn is 35th, and then Florida's 20th in defense, Auburn's 23rd. So these are close numbers. Obviously, they're very close teams, but I think everybody has this perception after the Mississippi State game that Auburn is just this juggernaut that's building to, and has been fantastic all year long. It's just not true when you look at the underlying numbers. Same thing as I think the narrative is that Florida's defense has struggled, mightily in some of these games. And again, I don't think that's true either. In fact, I think the defense is really Trask played well in that game against Kentucky, but the reason they won that game is the defense started getting stops. And, again, that I think is reflected in the numbers when I look back at it, but isn't necessarily what my memory was when watching those games.
Man, can Saturday get here already?
Yeah, work is going to be rough on Tuesday and Wednesday. By the time Thursday gets around, it'll be like, all right, we're getting closer. But
Yep.
but Wednesday and Thursday or Tuesday and Wednesday could be a little bit rough.
I think so. I'm definitely ready for this one. I think the fan base is too. Of course, we'll read reaction. Of course, you mentioned offensive line study coming out and looking at what those guys, for through 5 games, what they've been about so far. Of course, I'm sure you got the Auburn preview coming out as well.
Absolutely, we'll have people covered. Hopefully they enjoy it, and this is one of those where this is one of those games where I think the home field advantage really makes a difference. I was surprised Florida was a 3-point underdog when I looked at it, and I'm even more surprised as I look closer. It's one of those things where recency bias in terms of that Mississippi State win, I think, is pushing Auburn to a place where I mean, it may be that they win by a field goal. I think it's that kind of game. I think it's going to be a close game. I don't think this is a 56-20 game either way.
And quickly, Will, before we talk behind the scenes, you've been impressed with Kyle Trask.
I've been very impressed with Kyle Trask. I think, if you look at the yards above replacement that I measure, he's been up over 2 in both of the games that he's played thus far. He's obviously very decisive when he's getting the ball out. The receivers are open a lot of the time, which is one of the things that you look for. It's one of the things I really liked about Joe Burrow when you were looking at the tape of him in high school and even some of his tape at Ohio State, was that when he was throwing at guys, the guys were wide open, which meant he was going to the right spot. And I think it's been rare to see Trask have to try to fit something into a tight window. Just he's throwing where the windows are open. Now, the question is going to be, those windows get a little bit tighter when you play against a team like Auburn. So it's obviously a step up in competition. But, I mean, you can't ask for more than what the guy's done the last couple of weeks. I mean, he completed everything against Tennessee and really lit them up in the first half. And if Copeland brings in that ball that he hits him in the hands on the sideline, it looks like a really impressive game. And, a lot sort of like the performance for Nick's last week against Mississippi State would have been the same type of performance, at least number-wise. And then against Towson, just all the completions over and over and over again. And you and I have talked. It's hard to complete 70% of your passes against air, and he's out there completing 90 against Towson. So to not have one slip off your fingers, to not throw one right into the dirt when you're trying to get it out quickly. Those sorts of things is an impressive thing. So, Mullen talked early in the year before Franks was hurt that he viewed his quarterbacks as 3 starters and that they were all starter level quality. And, you wonder whether that's just coach speak or not. But Trask thus far has proven that it's not coach speak, that he deserves to be at Florida, and he's really taken his opportunity and run with it.
All right. That's Will Miles. You can find him and his site at readandreaction.com and on Twitter at Will Miles SEC. I'm the host of Gators Breakdown, David Waters. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. Guys and girls out there, thanks for listening to this episode of Gators Breakdown.